Thecreepingshadows, a chilling tale. Welcome to the Creeping Shadows. Tonight, we plunge into a tale of darkness and fear. In a small, forgotten town, something sinister lurks beyond the veil of night. People whisper of shadows that creep through alleyways, moving in ways no human could. As the sun sets, these shadows grow bolder, creeping into homes, waiting for their next victim. One by one, residents disappear without a trace. Is it just superstition? Or has darkness itself come alive? Stay with me as we unravel the mystery behind the creeping shadows. The first disappearance. It began with whispers, those soft, muted sounds carried in the shadows of taverns and on the cobblestone streets of Larkwood. A village so small, most maps had forgotten it was there. Life trundled on there, like the river curled through the valley, waited in mist. Still, one day, something shifted. It was mid-October when the first person disappeared. Olivia Whitmore was a widow, living on the edge of town, about whom no one paid much notice. She tended her garden by day, sold herbs at the weekly market, and was always home before dusk. This particular evening, as the last light faded from her windows, her door was still ajar, and Olivia was gone. No one heard a scream. No one saw anything out of the ordinary. Her cottage looked untouched, except for the faintest traces of something on the floor, as if something had dragged itself in or out. The townsfolk spoke of wolves, or maybe bandits, but those who'd lived in Larkwood the longest remembered an older tale, the tale of the creeping shadows. They said, during the stillest hours of night, that the shadows lived life as if with a mind of their own, slipping through cracks in floors and beneath doors to find their prey. Most dismissed it as a child's story, but those who had witnessed it knew better. They kept their windows shut and locked at night, burning candles until dawn. Olivia's disappearance was just the start. Town of Fear. Days passed, and then another was gone. This time it was Samuel, the town's only blacksmith. His apprentice found his forge cold one morning, the hammer still resting on the anvil where Samuel had been working late. The same faint marks were there, but no sign of a struggle. Panic grasped Larkwood. People stopped going outdoors after nightfall. Parents had their families huddled together, candle-lit and barred windows to illuminate their threatened lives. The town elders called frantic meetings in an effort to come up with some solution, but no one could explain the mysterious disappearances. And then the sightings started. It was always at the corner of someone's eye, a shadow darker than the night itself, moving unnaturally against walls or slipping through the narrow alleyways between the houses. Some said they saw figures vaguely human but twisted, as if the darkness itself had taken shape. Others claimed the shadows whispered, calling them closer. A young boy named Ethan claimed to have seen one of the shadows up close. He had been playing by the river when something cold touched him from behind. It was darkness that pooled at his feet. He saw it slither toward him like some living thing, but when he screamed, it vanished as if it had never been there at all. His parents just labeled it an overactive imagination, but kept him indoors after that. The stranger. He had been playing by the river when something cold touched him from behind. It was darkness that pooled at his feet. He saw it slither toward him like some living thing, but when he screamed, it vanished as if it had never been there at all. His parents simply labeled it an overactive imagination, but kept him indoors after that. Just when the people thought all hope was lost, a stranger came to town. He called himself Elias, but the people had never seen such a man. Elias wore dark, tattered clothes and a satchel full of odd instruments. He did not talk much until he learned that the locals had disappeared, but then his words dripped with an authority which even the bravest among them couldn't match. "I've dealt with them before," he said. "The shadows. They feed on fear. They linger in places where the line between our world and theirs is thinnest. Larkwood is one of those places." Everybody wondered whether he really was telling the truth, but then desperation does have its ways of persuasiveness. Elias said that the darkness could be driven out, but it will not come without a price. The town needed to confront the darkness head-on, or else to be devoured by it. Confronting the darkness. The night Elias had determined that it would be the final night, moonless, and the sky, an infinite chasm above, he gathered the townsfolk at the center of Larkwood, each carrying a lantern that flickered in the chill of the air. He charged them to keep close, not to stray off from the light, as the shadows would look to find a chink in their armor. It was late. Midnight seemed approaching. Heavy air. None of it had a word to say, as if silence layered over the town. The lanterns had started flickering and then dying, light, and from the darkness they came. At first, it was a mere motion, a movement that lurked there on the edge of the light. Then the shadows started to take their forms. They slithered along the walls and across the floor, twisting and throbbing like twisted blood vessels. Faces seemed to rise out of the night air, shapes of anguish and horror writhing and twisted, eyes blazing with a kind of malignant glow. Now Elias stepped forward, his voice firm though strained. He began to chant some words no one there knew the meaning of. His hands jerked forward toward the creeping figures, as though calling them. The shadows reeled back initially, hissing like serpents, though they would not withdraw for long. They re-emerged again, pushing forward into the circle of lights erected by the townspeople. They checked their strength. For an instant, it seemed all was lost. Shadows drove in closer still. The lantern light brightened once more. Shadowy impulses cramped the air, and one of the villagers shrieked as a shadow wrapped around his leg and dragged him into darkness. Elias threw a powder from his satchel onto the creature, and it shrieked, dissolved into mist. The battle with the shadows raged for what seemed like hours, though in reality it was only minutes. Elias moved from side to side of the circle, chanting, tossing his powders, keeping the shadows at bay. And finally, just when the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the shadows began to retreat. One by one, they slid back into the cracks and crevices whence they came, hissing in disgust as they vanished from sight. The townsfolk stood there, shaken and tired, saying nothing as the final whisper of the creeping shadows disappeared with the sun's rising. The aftermath. The days that followed passed and saw the town of Larkwood gradually returning to a normal rhythm of daily activities, though never forgetting that night. Elias stayed longer, ensuring that indeed the shadows were gone. However, he warned them that darkness was never too far away and could roll in again if they let fear ever take control once more. Then one morning he simply disappeared, leaving behind only the faintest trace of footprints leading out of town. It was a night like this that the residents of Larkwood never mentioned the shadows again, but on odd nights, when the wind was quiet and moon hid behind a thick bank of clouds, some could swear and still swear they could hear the faint whisper within the darkness, that these creeping shadows watched and waited patiently for their next opportunity. Conclusion. The night air wraps thick and alive around the city. Thank you for coming tonight. And remember, in the quietest hours of night, when the shadows seem to move just a little, too close, keep your lights on and your doors locked. You never know what's waiting in the dark. Until next time, stay safe and be wary of the creeping shadows.